On this episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show, we talk about how to stay current and not get overwhelmed with new research.
The Ask Mike Reinold Show. Helping people feel better, move better, and perform better.
Before we get to the podcast, I wanted to make sure you knew about my free online course on the Introduction to Performance Therapy and Training. If you want to learn how to get started optimizing and enhancing performance, this is the course for you. Head to mikereinold.com/performance to sign up today. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show. I am joined by the team at Champion here, answering your questions. Anything you want to talk about, physical therapy, sport performance, some fitness, strength and conditioning stuff, anything you want to talk about, ask away. Head to mikereinold.com, click on that podcast link, and you can fill out the form to ask a question just like the one we're about to answer. So again, just introducing the crew. We have Dave Tilley, Dan Pope, Dewesh Podell, Mike Scuduto, Lisa Russell, and Lenny Macrina, as usual. Most of the crew, right? We're missing the students again here. So again, it's been an epically long board that our students taken. But anyway, we're here answering your questions. And today we have one from the UK, which is good. An international question from Jordan. He says, "Hello, Champion crew." Hello, cheerio. I've been working my way through all the podcasts so far since I found it around 6 months ago, and they're great. Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate that. That's a lot of nonsense you've probably listened to. I hope you've gotten a couple of good pearls from that. But that's a lot of nonsense. We're almost at 300 now, right? What are we over, like 250 now? I don't even know.
Big celebration.
We're gonna do it. We're gonna right when COVID 22 hits. We're gonna start the next one. Appreciate Jordan. So let's see. Jordan's question is where do you all go to look for new research? I'm a first year PT student and really want to be productive with spare time and wider reading. And, I like this question because we do get it every now and then, and we have answered it in certain ways in the past, but I do think it's important that questions like this, that we keep current, right? Because I do think that our opinions change a little bit. So I don't know, maybe we can all briefly kind of talk about some of our habits and what we do a little bit here. But I think, the main question is, he wants to know is where do you go to look for new research, right? And that's like, a huge question. So why don't we talk about specifically what each of us do? And I think from there, maybe we'll have some good ideas for Jordan. So who wants to go first? One at a time. All right, Tilly, what do you think? Tilly definitely stays up with the research. How do you handle all the info?
I have followed your guys' lead, and I typically go for journal updates or alerts via email. So when a new monthly journal comes out, I will subscribe to the table of contents, give it a scan through. There's probably like one or two articles. I'm like, maybe. And then I'll read the abstract. And if it seems like it fits, what I'm either seeing in the clinic or things I'm interested in, I'll get the full access and I'll go that way. And then I think personally for me, just getting alerts on certain authors or certain subjects that are really kind of in my wheelhouse. So things that are maybe unique. So I've used an example in the past, but I treat a lot of the hypermobile hip, so hip micro instability, and there's a few surgeons and people who are publishing pretty great research there, elbow OCDs, unique gymnastics. So I just stay in line with the authors that are publishing there, and usually either you find their work or they're on papers with other authors who are also in that space, and I just kind of follow down the rabbit hole a little bit into like those authors and things of that nature, and it seems to be helpful.
Yeah, so I think that's a great first strategy, right? So for each of the main medical journals that we follow, they all should have a way of getting updated when they have a new issue, or actually nowadays it's not even issue based more. It's now that they're released online. So you could get like an update or two a day technically from that. So I think that's a good first one. And then the other one is you can do this in PubMed, which is like the big online database to search for journal articles, is you can set up specific alerts to searches. So like you could search for an author, or you can search for a query, right? It's like a topic that you want. So I have a bunch of those that go out, and I get updates once a month because you can get a lot of those. But with authors that I follow that I really respect, and topics, I'll get an email once a month with all the updates for that. So based on that, let me ask a question here. There's a million journals out there. Dave, how do you decide which journals that you follow?
Well, you definitely know there are some journals that are kind of more higher tier, higher quality, right? So, JOSPT, ISJSPT, those ones are in our PT world are there. And then a lot of surgical journals, right? Like elbow and shoulder and, AJSM, those ones are just kind of known to be high quality research journals that are very, very strict on like who they accept. Sports Health is another one, why they accept. So just the quality of the journal kind of you can tend over time if you, subscribe to a journal and you find the papers are less than, valid or less than reliable. Then you look at the
Unsubscribe.
if you look at the methods 4 or 5 times in a study and you're like, and like month getting shaky, then you're probably going to lean away from that. But I guess they kind of just like rise to the top, right? If you keep seeing the same journal coming up over and over in presentations or when you talk with people, or if the people in those authors that are publishing are pretty high quality, they're great clinicians, they work pretty stringent at universities, then you can kind of follow those.
I think that's a good place to start to, because there's a million journals out there. You can follow a bunch and you're going to get overwhelmed, right? Especially the ones that have like these new online journals, right? Because they're just pumping out millions of them because it's a for-profit machine, right? So there's a lot of articles. Most of them are garbage, right? You got to keep that in mind. So let's start real simple. Follow JOSPT, International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy, AJSM, and then probably British Journal Sports Medicine would probably be the top 4. And then if you have specific things like you like shoulder elbow, do journal shoulder elbow surgery, or journal athletic training, or strength and conditioning, for example. Like you have those specific ones. But why don't you just start with those? They're the most editorial based. They have large editorial crews. They have great peer reviews. You're going to get quality research there and not go down any rabbit holes. So that's a good technique. Let me see, Len, what do you do? How do you stay current?
Yeah, I do everything that everybody has talked about. And I think another thing that has really helped me and then also helps me to interact is, believe it or not, Twitter and social media. I know some people don't do it as much and are kind of poo-poo on it just because it can get really intense. But I take what it gives me and I don't try to do too much most of the time. I do instigate a little. But, I follow people on Twitter that I respect. And if they're putting research out, they're going to tweet it, or somebody will retweet it, or you start talking about it and you see it and you're like, ooh, I missed that, but ooh, I want to look into that. And then you can interact with the author and like, hey, great job, love this research. Can you give me a little more details on blah, blah, blah. And you have a conversation with the author about their research. It's pretty neat. So I use a lot of social media, especially Twitter, for this. And then I will use that to even, use it for my own social media posts, meaning like Instagram or something like that. Like Dan Pope has been doing is, he'll put a great content out and then I'll also put a research article out that is influencing how he's treating. So I think it's a win-win, to be able to interact with the authors and to be able to kind of see what's out there that's new.
So that's good too. So follow some people on social media that some people, like Twitter is a big one where like, oh, this was cool, I just read this. Where then like Instagram's probably more cool, like, oh, I read this and here's what I'm thinking type thing.
Right.
You need to be a little bit careful right there, because sometimes like what you're doing is you're getting really biased interpretations of it.
Yes.
I think the most important thing you do is that, like, and that's why I think Twitter is good, is like if somebody's talking about an article, you just go read the article, right? Like don't read the educational post. Now, I trust Dan Pope and fitnesspainfree.com, right? Because I know he's going to have some reliable tidbits. So I follow him and I learn when he posts something. But there's a lot of people that are just like regurgitating some bias, or maybe their interpretation isn't what I kind of would have done, with the thing. So I think that's good. One tip I have for you for Twitter, if you want to get involved in the Twitter research game, is when you're talking about an article, don't take a screenshot of the article without a link. Just send the link to PubMed, right? I hate when people do that. And you know who I'm talking about, right? But like you say this is a great article and then you take a screen capture of it. So now it's like a 30-word title. I can't even like select it and paste it into PubMed to find the article. It's impossible. If you want to start a conversation, have the link so that way we can all read it. Just a little tidbit. That's a little free tidbit on this week's episode. So, all right, Lisa, what about you? What do you do? Anything different on your end with how you stay current?
I feel like I do a lot of what everybody just said. I'm newer to the Twitter paying attention. I was like overwhelmed by that for a while, and I've recently started paying attention and have like started following a lot of rowing research authors, and I feel like I get a new article every day or every other day to read that I like otherwise wouldn't have noticed. So that's pretty cool.
Great. Well, so I think that's a good tip though, Lisa, right there, is that you started Twitter. I was like this at the beginning of Twitter. You overwhelmed yourself by following too much, right? And you'll find that just don't be afraid to unfollow people, right? And kind of like get a little broad and then, oh, you know what, I'm not getting as much, like really narrow it down so that way the things you see are impactful. So awesome. Keep going. Sorry, I just thought that
No,
was
no,
really
no.
cool.
And then similarly, I follow a lot of authors that tend to pump out the rowing research so that I'm up to date on that. And then, I mean, I don't know, then I feel like I read one thing and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I see in the, the citations they have within that paper, of course, that there's like other things. I'm like, okay, yes, this would be cool for me to read too, so
Love
that I
it.
can understand it better. So I feel like I just then sort of
Yes.
spiral for a bit. But yeah, and I mean, I feel like as a new grad, I struggled with making time for current research because I felt like I was semi just overwhelmed with like learning how to do my job. And I
Right.
didn't feel like my brain had space for anything more. So I feel like it's something that as I have progressed, I've prioritized time for, and it makes a big difference. But
I like that. That's a good tidbit. I mean, it's probably it's okay that you feel overwhelmed at the beginning because you got a lot going on. You're learning a lot of new things. But I like that point. That was huge, Lisa, is when you're reading an article and you're reading like the intro and the discussion, there's references, right? And then you end up reading those articles. I think that's another great way because they make like a very profound statement in the introduction that like, hey, we are doing this study because of these things. So like, oh man, that's fantastic. I can go read that study now. That's a great way to also stay current, is to make sure you're reading through the references that are relevant. So awesome. What about you, Dan? What do you do?
Well, I was just going to add everything that everyone else has. I mean, I think I read through an article or a webinar, the Mike Reinold Inner Circle, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago, kind of outlined your way of going through research, and I followed that since, and we've talked about that several times. I think one thing I will say, and I think this is a problem as human beings that we have right now, is there's way too much information out there, and our brains are not meant to be able to take all of this in. And for me, I started off by trying to learn as much as possible, and I still do. But one of the things I've changed a lot is that I don't have a superficial of a lot of understanding of a lot of different things anymore. I try to go a little bit deeper on certain topics. And for me, that's been, I read an article, I'm like, wow, this is really relevant. This is going to change my practice, or it really influences the way I think. I'm going to try to, let's say, make a seminar or a little webinar about it. I'll try to make a social media post. I'll talk to the students about it. I'll try to share it. I'll start these discussions, and then we'll try to get more understanding from that one article. And then I'll actually go back and update my thought process and reread these articles, reread my own social media, see if I still agree with that, and then update it. And I think that allows me to actually learn a bit better and be a better practitioner over the course of time. Because what I was finding is I was reading so much information that I wasn't really taking anything from anything. I would say like, oh, wow, I read this book or this article like years ago. I got nothing from that, and I forgot everything. So I think you have to be a little cautious, and sometimes less is more, and try to go a little deeper on certain topics as opposed to learn so much, because there's a ridiculous amount out there.
Yeah, no, that's sweet, Dan. And great point there too about how so the way Dan synthesizes the evidence a little bit is that he then tries to make an Instagram post or whatever about that information. That's a great thing a student can do, right? And I tell that to our students all the time, is share your journey, share what you're learning. Don't proclaim false expertise, and don't like come up with these great huge statements based on what you read about, like, oh, now that I read this, all this is wrong. Just say like, oh wow, I just read this study and here's a couple of key points that I'm going to go forth. But I like that. Like, you're early in your career as a student. Why don't you pick a topic that you're passionate about right now that maybe you're not learning about in school? So maybe you're in neuro time, but you really like gymnastics, right? Well, do some PubMed stuff, right? And make sure you're following the gymnastic stuff to keep your brain passionate about gymnastics. So let me see. I know Dewesh wanted to say something, but Mike, do you have to go? I know we're getting close. Mike might have somebody. If you have anything else, why don't you jump in just in case you have to take off, Mike?
I think Dan Pope's point was great. It doesn't seem to be a consumption issue for new grads. It seems to be an integration and a synthesization, if that's a word. But I think
awesome.
The more you consume is not necessarily better. Choose things that are relevant to you, and then go on a little bit of a deeper dive and try and integrate it into your practice. I think that's the best way to learn, especially as a new grad, from the new research.
Right. And I think it's a great way if you have a normal just gen pop like outpatient ortho job, but you really love golf, right? It's a way to keep like your brain going about golf is just make sure you're on top of the golf literature. And as new things come out, you apply it. And you're gonna accidentally get really good at golf over time, right? Just by repetitions. And then your practice will start to specialize. It'll be great. So awesome. All right, Dewesh, what about you? Anything different in the strength and conditioning world?
I don't know that it's that different in the strength conditioning world, but I kind of wanted to take it from like a slightly different perspective. And it's kind of going off what Dan was saying a little bit about overconsumption, but also adding to what Mike just said about, not necessarily worrying about overconsumption early on. But I know I definitely ran into the problem of early on when I first started coaching was I was taking in so much information, like to the point where I felt like I had zero thoughts of my own. I felt like I was just kind of saying what everyone else in the industry was saying, whether it was, other strength coaches or, even PTs that I was learning from. And it made it really hard for me to come up with like concepts and systems and, big picture stuff in my own head and really started applying that stuff. And it just really felt like I didn't have my like own coaching style, own like coaching, ideologies and stuff. So for me, I actually, and this is probably about 2 years ago at this point. So after having coached for 3 years and taken in an insane amount of information and doing a ton of Con Ed, I got to the point of just like not having my own thoughts. So I said like, all right, 6 months, I'm going to go without taking any information. I literally shut out for 6 months of like learning from other people. But what I did was I took that time to really start troubleshooting stuff and ideas in my own head and really started applying a lot of the stuff that I had learned for the last 3 to 6 years since I was, looking at all this stuff since I was in school and really started applying it to my athletes, having conversations with, my peers and, mentors and, other people in the industry and stuff. And I think that probably made me a better coach because I got to really think about all this stuff in my own head. And I think that's definitely something that people can get in trouble with. They just kind of start, regurgitating what everyone else is saying or like blindly following research or whatever. And it gets to the point of not really having your own concepts and, ideas. So, that's just a little bit of what I did for a period of time. It's not me saying like, hey, don't look at research and like, don't do Con Ed. You definitely have to. I'm definitely back in the thick of it and, probably consuming a bunch of podcasts and, all that stuff now. But, there definitely was a period of time where I just kind of shut out for a little bit and I felt like I benefited from it.
That's awesome. And I think the general underlying theme that I'm hearing for everybody here is that it's easy to get overwhelmed and you're going to not learn anything if you try to learn everything. Right. I think that's like a really, really big point here. So be really, really smart and strict with what you're learning. Right. And I think that will be very helpful for you. Right. So if you feel deficient with a certain thing that you need to do for your job, so you get a job and there's a ton of like low back pain patients, then be really strict on digging into the research to kind of learn for that. But then otherwise going forward, stick to some of the main journals, some of the most reputable journals that are not going to publish garbage that just might confuse you, right? Because if you have a terrible study that has terrible methodology, it sometimes doesn't help. It makes things more confusing. So keep that in mind with the literature. Sometimes the literature just adds doubt, right? We see this with studies all the time that have a wide variety of people with a wide variety of problems, and they're trying to answer a question. It doesn't make sense. It's too vague, right? So be specific. Don't get overwhelmed. Just look for those special little things that interest you the most. And I think that's probably the best approach. So awesome. All right. Great job. Thanks, Jordan, for the question. We really appreciate it. If you have a question like that, please head to MikeReinold.com, click on that podcast link and ask away. And we will be sure to see you on the next episode. Thanks again.